everyone. I'm Monica Peart, Senior Vice President of Data Products at eMarketer, and I'm based in the Atlanta area. Welcome to today's webinar, Turning Headwinds into Opportunities, Unlocking Global E-commerce Growth Amid Evolving Markets and Consumer Trends. As e-commerce rapidly evolves, understanding the dynamics shaping consumer behavior is critical. Today, I'm excited to be joined by two industry experts, Tonia Luykx, Chief Revenue Officer at e-commerce solutions provider ESW, joining us from Dublin. Thanks for being here, Tonia.
Thanks, Monica. I'm delighted to be here.
And my colleague, Carina Perkins, Senior Analyst at eMarketer, who focuses on retail and e-commerce, is dialing in from the UK. Hi, Carina.
Hi, Monica.
Together, Tonia and Carina will share key trends, actionable insights, and strategic priorities informed by the findings of a single comprehensive survey that powered two distinct reports, ESW's Global Voices Report and eMarketer's Global Shopper Report. During today's discussion, we'll explore valuable insights from both reports to help retailers and brands successfully navigate these shifts. Before I pass it over to Carina to get us started, for those of you new to eMarketer, we are the go-to resource for marketing, advertising, and commerce insights. And whether you're new or an eMarketer regular, we want to hear from you. Use the chat to the right of the video player to tell us where you're tuning in from and to ask questions. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A. So with that, let's get started. Carina, why don't you let us in on some of the findings from the Global Shopper Report?
Thanks, Monica, and hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the market and consumer trends that we're seeing in shopping and how retailers and brands can really unlock e-commerce growth in the face of some of the headwinds that we're facing. So we're going to start by looking at the average global shopper in 2025 and what their preferences and priorities are. And then we'll take a look at the path to purchase and some of the headwinds that could disrupt shopping habits in the future. And finally, we'll cover some strategic priorities for brands and retailers in 2025. First, though, I just wanted to share a bit more information on the survey that our reports and this presentation is based on. So it was conducted by ESW between October and November 2024, and there were over 18,000 adult respondents in 18 countries worldwide. So what did this survey tell us about the average global shopper in 2025? Let's start with their spending habits. We saw a big surge towards e-commerce during the pandemic as the stores were shut and people stayed inside. And since then, there has in some markets, particularly countries like the UK, been a bit of contraction and a shift back to in-store. But generally, people are still really embracing a mix of online and in-store shopping. And globally, the average consumer made over 55% of their purchases online in the past year. And that's across clothing, footwear, accessories, luxury, cosmetics, consumer electronics, and toys and hobby. So there is some variation between countries here. The proportion of goods bought online was highest in China at 65.7% and lowest in South Africa at 47%. But pretty generally, it's quite high across the world now. Cross-border shopping is also becoming really popular, and that's driven by people seeking more variety, seeking lower prices, and just more awareness worldwide about brands. On average, shoppers are spending about the same amount on orders from their own countries as they are from other countries, so we can see that cross-border shopping is a really big deal. So what are people buying online? Fashion and beauty really stand out here as big categories online. They're both categories that are bought fairly regularly and often impulsively versus a big ticket item such as a piece of furniture. They're fairly low price points and they've got quite short decision cycles, which makes them ideal for online shopping. And then you've got the social media effect. So these products categories are quite big on social media, and you have products going viral on platforms such as Instagram and TikTok Shop and YouTube. And now with shoppable media, it's increasingly easy to buy these products online. The product mix is pretty similar across markets worldwide, although there is a little bit of variation, most notably in luxury goods. So globally, only 20.5% of shoppers have bought a luxury goods item online, but that figure is much higher in China, where it's 57%, the UAE, where it's 45%, and India, where it's 37%. And these are all countries where there's quite high demand for luxury goods from other markets. When it comes to purchase considerations, we're still seeing that price is number one by quite a significant margin. Shoppers are particularly price sensitive at the moment, thanks to the economic situation that many countries are facing. And the survey found that nearly 3 in 10 shoppers globally will cut their online spending this year. And that rises to over 40% of shoppers in Mexico and France. And the biggest reason for cutting online spending is to save money. But that's not true worldwide, and price is not the biggest consideration in every market. So in China, India, and the UAE, buying from a trusted brand is actually more important than price or any consideration. Given the focus on price, it's perhaps not surprising that China comes out top when it comes to the countries that people are buying from. And we've obviously had the Shein, Temu, AliExpress. They've expanded quite rapidly across other markets, and they're enjoying a lot of success with their aggressive marketing and ultra low prices. When asked about the attributes that they associate with goods from China, value comes first, followed by functionality. But I think it's important to note here that people aren't just buying goods from China. We can see here that the US, Japan, the UK, and Germany are also really popular cross-border shopping destinations globally. Another trend that we're seeing as people seek to save money is shopping secondhand. So globally, 38.9% of shoppers have bought a refurbished or used item online, and that rises to as high as 53.2% in India. I think sustainability does play a bit of a role here, but saving money is the primary driver for buying used or refurbished goods. And I think that's why we've seen a bit of an uplift on this in the last couple of years. So the path to purchase, how are consumers finding and buying products? Most shoppers are still starting their search for new products on a search engine like Google, and that is true across age groups, particularly among 45 to 64-year-olds. But I think it's worth noting again that there's lots of shoppers who are starting their product searches on different channels, and that includes marketplaces, stores, brands' own websites, and social media platforms. And the mix here can vary quite significantly by age. So 18 to 34-year-olds are actually more likely to discover new product on a social platform than they are in store. There's also some regional variation on the importance of different channels for discovery. So we can see here that India, China, and the UAE marketplaces are actually the most popular channel for starting their product search. And social media is much more important in these countries than it is in other globally for that discovery element. Social networks are also somewhere that people are going to research and evaluate brands and products. Influencers have a role to play here, but we do know increasingly that people value the opinion of their peers when they're deciding what to buy. So I think we're seeing kind of product videos, demonstration videos from micro-influencers are really powerful at driving that decision process. And we can see here that YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok have quite a significant gap over the other social media platforms when it comes to research and consideration. Another factor that's actually really influential when it comes to purchasing decisions is sponsored products and ads. So far from finding them a nuisance or intrusive, over 60% of online shoppers globally say that they're helpful when deciding what to buy, and 76% have made a purchase after seeing a sponsored ad or product. And that's highest in China and India, where 9 in 10 shoppers have bought an item after seeing an ad or sponsored product. And of course, social networks aren't just important for discovery and consideration, they've also become a big commerce channel. That's particularly true in China, where apps such as WeChat and Douyin have facilitated the expansion of e-commerce. We're seeing social commerce catch on a little bit more slowly in Europe and the US. And these are countries where traditional e-commerce channels are much stronger and consumers have fairly ingrained online shopping habits. But globally, we're seeing just under a third of shoppers are buying via social platforms. So it's a really important channel for brands to be considering. Meta is still dominating social commerce globally. Facebook Marketplace is actually the top destination, and that's down to that kind of peer-to-peer shopping experience, followed by Facebook and Instagram. But again, we're seeing some regional variations. In the UK, where TikTok launched TikTok Shop first outside of Asia, TikTok is actually now the leading social commerce platform. So looking to the year ahead, there's a few factors that could impact online shopping habits. The first one is trade wars. So, President Trump has signed an agreement with countries like the UK and Indonesia, and it's nearing an agreement with India. But the US is also ramping up tariffs with other countries and recently threatened a 30% tariff for the EU and Mexico. And that really could hit US cross-border shopping with those countries. This study by Numerator here found that 32% of US adults said they would buy fewer imported goods, and a quarter said they would switch to US-made alternatives due to the tariffs. Globally, and partly because of this trade tensions, we're also seeing that consumer price inflation is creeping up again, which could impact online spending. This isn't happening in every market, and some markets are going to be more resilient to it, but in some markets, it's certainly a problem. An ESW survey found over a fifth of shoppers plan to spend more time checking product specs and prices in the next 12 months. So we know that shoppers are price sensitive, and this is going to be a big consideration for them. Last but certainly not least is AI. We've seen the rapid incorporation of generative AI into shopping journeys, and that's already having an impact on the path to purchase and shopping habits overall. And I think particularly as consumers become more comfortable using AI, and we're seeing that accelerate with the integration of technology into smartphones and smart glasses, AI is going to start having more of an impact on those shopping journeys. Particularly if we do see these rapid developments in agentic AI, which we're being promised, it does have the potential to completely transform the shopping journey, potentially enabling shopping agents that can automate the entire process. And you can see here an example of what that might look like. I think we're a little way off that yet, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. So with all of these trends and habits in mind, what are some strategic priorities for brands and retailers in 2025? Firstly, I would say that brands and retailers really need to think about diversifying their sales channels and offering a really seamless and consistent experience across those channels. So social networks, marketplaces, they're important, but also their own websites remain a really important channel for them to think about. Secondly, they need to invest in some cross-channel advertising. So that could be sponsored listings, ads on marketplaces, paid social media posts. Thirdly, and this is a really, really crucial one, I think, they need to localize the shopping experience to build trust with international customers. So that can be local pricing, region-specific payment options, localized language support. It's really important to keep people coming. Finally, they need to optimize their visibility across search, marketplaces, and social feeds. And as agentic AI gains pace, a really crucial part of that is going to be tailoring product descriptions and metadata for AI agents. So that's it, Monica. I will pass it back to you now for our chat with Tonia.
Thank you, Carina. That was really great to understand today's consumer journey, and some of the elements that are really popping up in terms of how retailers and brands can address the new consumer journey, and how the global situation is also impacting that. And great table setting, really, for our conversation that's coming up. So with that, I'd like to now welcome back Tonia, Luykx, CRO at ESW, for our discussion. Tonia, thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Monica, and thanks, Carina. Great presentation.
Thanks, Tonia.
And so from here, why don't we dive into one of the core topics across the survey, and certainly coming off of Carina's presentation here, cross-border. Tonia, what are the important and primary motivations driving consumers to shop internationally?
I want to just pick up on something that Carina said. When we think about social commerce, and social commerce, right, is powered by social networks, right? So if we think about the availability of content that we have available, it enables brands to advertise, to sell, to position their products globally, right? Irrelevant of where they're based, or where the viewer is actually viewing it from. So that enables, right, that drives the awareness. If we think about the consumer that's actually going out there and making the purchase, right? Consumers these days, they're highly intentional on price and access, right? So they want the product they want at the right price. That is simply the way it operates. Of course, across our study, which we did across 6 different continents, When you talk about price, it's not just the price of the product, but it's having that ultimate clarity on the complete price. So customs, duties, delivery, right? And we won't even touch on returns yet. We can talk about that a bit later. They're the things which consumers want to see. What is striking, though, is that in the survey, we identified that 80% of people in the survey, respondents in the survey, have already made an international, right, purchase, right? So the demand is there, right? The demand is there, but how do you get the balance between price and access and also product availability? That's another big demand. So people want to be able to access the product irrelevant of where they're actually the product has been shipped to. I think one of the things which is a restrictor for like why do these sometimes these shopping expeditions by consumers not convert into actual completed orders. It's when they see really, really high shipping costs and long shipping times, right? That comes back to consumer expectations about when can I have my product. The expectations in my country are X, Y, or Z, which we can touch on a bit later. But it's about meeting those expectations as well.
And Carina, I don't know if you had anything you'd like to add here.
No, I mean, I think Tonia was really spot on with all of that. I think as well, just to touch on the idea that different consumers in different countries will have slightly different motivators, and that's something that we've seen throughout this survey and kind of all of our findings. So while there are some global trends, it's really worth keeping an eye on those country by country specifics, because like we saw, in most countries, price is the kind of biggest consideration. It's all people are thinking about, including when they're having online orders. But in countries like China and countries like the UAE, actually, they really want to buy the trusted brands and they really want that choice, as Tonia said, of the product that they want. And then they're willing to, I think, to pay a bit more. And it's interesting, that's why we see in those countries actually luxury goods as a kind of a cross-border category is quite significant. So I think it's brands really being aware of the countries that they're targeting to and what the priorities are in those countries.
So driven definitely by choice and growing in choice throughout the different marketplaces and brands. Um, Karina, something that you mentioned earlier regarding tariffs and just how this changes the scope of consumer shopping worldwide. How are we expecting tariffs to change consumer shopping?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think globally we're still going to see an awful lot of cross-border shopping because not all global cross-border trade is between the US, who's kind of imposing these tariffs in the main, and other countries globally. So a lot of people are buying from China, a lot of people are buying from the UK, a lot of people are buying from other markets. I think in terms of the US buying from other markets worldwide, it's really going to depend on whether we see those super high tariffs being imposed. If they're implementing a 30% tariff on EU goods, I think inevitably, even in luxury, to be honest, that's a kind of level at which people are going to be put off paying that additional price, and retailers and brands are going to have to pass on that price. Whether we're going to see it the other way, the other direction, whether people in Europe will buy less from the US, I think is going to depend on whether there are any retaliatory tariffs. Um, the trade war, there are issues around sentiment, but I think that's not really what's front of mind when people are deciding what to buy. Like we said before, it's like, do they want that product and what price are they willing to pay for it? I think a sort of wider impact to cross-border shopping, but also e-commerce as a whole potentially, is that the tariff regime is disrupting some global trade flows. We're starting to see a bit of consumer price inflation creep back for that and other reasons. And because people are so price sensitive, that could impact shopping, particularly in those markets where we know that consumers are really feeling the pinch already.
Yes, this makes a lot of sense. Uh, it's almost very hard to talk about e-commerce without this logistics piece. And Tonia, you started to address the logistics, just the shipping returns, any regulatory challenges. Are there things that brands and retailers must try to address with regard to shipping logistics, just to effectively meet this global consumer expectation?
Um, Monica, I think like the logistics and the supply chain component, incorporating taxes and customs and duties is by far the most complex part of global expansion, right? And it's really complex because the rules vary country by country. And navigating that as a brand, right, which is predominantly focused on producing great products, is a real challenge. And it's a real challenge to do it on their own at scale, but also when the needle is moving continuously and there are changes afoot that they're having to react with. Um, I think if we think about deliveries for a moment, right, this is the top issue that consumers have when they're deciding to buy or not to buy. It is not a one size fits all solution. So if I give you an example, Italy, there's a 3 day expectation of delivery in Italy. Brazil, they're willing to wait 2 weeks. So understanding the local requirement, the local consumer expectations enables you to actually build a system and a solution that meets those expectations, which eventually converts into higher conversion. Um, One often overlooked area is returns. And, we've got very savvy consumers out there. And they're savvy in a way that they want to buy, they want to try. And if they don't like, they want a really easy and seamless way that they can actually return that product. What we learned from the survey was that consumers are actually willing to pay a small price for a really clear and easy returns process. Um, and that we cannot, I can't put enough importance on investing time in a flexible, reliable, easy returns process for your customers on a per country basis. So all of this, sum it all up, it's not a one size fits all, right? You've got to build a model based on the different countries that you plan to expand into to ensure that you're meeting the expectations of the consumer. You're providing them with the level of customer experience that you want your brand to experience. And that also drives loyalty and repeat purchase. And that takes a lot of investment and a lot of time.
I would just add there actually, and Tony's made some really, really good points there. And another thing perhaps is also offering multiple options for people and being very transparent then around those costs. So you have an express option, which is perhaps more money, you have a standard option, you have an economy option. So that enables the consumers themselves to kind of balance out whether they're more concerned about the cost or the shipping. And yeah, I think Tonia is absolutely bang on about the returns. I think that is just such a priority for consumers, and it really should be a big priority for brands and retailers.
Yes, certainly thinking about how consumers just engage with the whole apparatus of shopping and returns being such a big part of that. It's just the reality. It makes sense that brands and retailers could focus on making this very seamless and very easy to do. Another area that comes up quite a lot and that the consumer starts to interact with, and we've talked a little bit about cost and just that being such a focus, is when they get into the checkout experience and their payment methods and preferences. Um, Carina, why don't you start here? Is there anything with regard to consumer payment preferences or even security concerns that might be impacting cart abandonment rates?
Yeah, absolutely. We know from the survey that people are using a really wide variety of payment methods to purchase online. So that's credit, debit cards, digital wallets, even cash in some markets in the Middle East. And there are those preferences can really, again, vary by country. So brands need to have a really good market by market understanding of how consumers want to pay. And they need to really make sure that they're offering that payment method, because we've seen surveys in the past that if consumers don't have their preferred payment option available, then they will go somewhere else. And increasingly now we're seeing that kind of buy now, pay later. That's also something that consumers are sometimes looking for. Another thing to think about is kind of the currency, especially if it's a cross-border purchase. Are you enabling people to purchase in their own currency? Have you got the prices in their own currency? So it's really clear to them what they're going to be paying. And security is, of course, a really big concern. I think the survey found that 4 in 10 shoppers globally have abandoned a purchase because they were concerned about the security of their payment information. So again, I think it's giving consumers sort of the reassurance that you've got a really robust payment option there, and you've got all of their preferred payment methods available.
I'd also add, so completely agree, Carina. I'd also add, and when we think about to expand globally, you've got to localize, right? And so localizing to meet those consumer experiences, as Carina mentioned, having those local payment methods, but also not showing the payment. It sounds simple, but not showing the payment methods that are not available or not applicable, right? So it has to be a tailored checkout experience, which looks and feels as if they're buying from a retailer from their own country or from their own region, right? We need to make it feel like a national transaction, right? Not something that is coming from from someone that doesn't understand the needs. So really tailoring and localizing it to ensure that it feels like a local experience. That's what consumers want, right?
I certainly know that's the case for me when I'm buying in this fashion, just looking at a retailer site and saying, okay, this feels really familiar. And that familiarity just having the opportunity to boost whether you make the purchase. So it's a really good call out here. And thinking also about the payments and what retailers and brands can do. Tonia, I know ESW focuses a lot on this. How should brands and retailers optimize their payment strategies to drive higher conversions?
So the optimization, right, is around, again, we come back to like understanding the individual country or the region in which you're selling to. Now, if we look at APAC, right, APAC has a really high growing percentage use of, the buy now, pay later, so BNPL, all the BNPL players, and digital wallets, right? Huge growth. Whereas other markets have a different tolerance for those type of payment methods. The key to success and the key to high conversion, kind of back to my point I made a few moments ago, is ensuring you know your market, you're presenting the needs, the options that the buyers are going to expect. Carina mentioned it earlier. If you look at the MENA region, cash on delivery accounts for about 25% of orders placed online, right? Having that built into your flow and a supply chain, because it's not just the payment, it's the supply chain, it's the follow-on supply chain that supports that type of payment method, is essential to success. It's understand your market, right? Understand your market, understand the buyer preferences, the consumer behaviors and the consumer expectations, and then build something specific for that market to ensure that you meet the needs.
Very helpful. One theme that, switching gears a little bit, one theme that really stood out to me, and I don't know if it would surprise listeners also, is just this focus on sustainability and how much that expectation has grown. Um, how important is sustainability in the consumer's decision-making process for online purchases? And are retailers even starting to meet this growing demand for that sustainability? Karina, why don't
Yeah,
you start us off here? Yeah.
sustainability is a really interesting one because I think it's somewhere that we see the kind of say-do gap is particularly wide. So if you ask people, do you care about sustainability and are you making efforts to be more sustainable? Are you changing your shopping habits to be more sustainable? Most people will say yes. And if you look across a lot of regions, a lot of people will say, yes, we really are. We're trying to be more sustainable. We're trying to live more sustainably. We're trying to change our shopping habits. But then when you ask them to list their most important purchase decision influences, sustainability is way down the table. It's always super low when versus things like price, trusted brand, shipping speed, shipping cost. It's actually sort of one of the lowest things. But I don't think just because there is that say-do gap that means that brands can discount it, because I think that shoppers do care about sustainability, and it's kind of unconsciously something that they're considering when they're deciding what brands to buy from and when they're building their perceptions about different brands. So while it might not be front of mind when they're kind of at that particular point of purchase, it will shape whether or not they're getting to that point of purchase or not. So I think it is a big deal, and I think we are seeing retailers start to address it in some countries, certainly more than others. But I think it's something that retailers and brands really worldwide need to be thinking about.
And Tonia,
Um,
I know this came up in the survey and also in the Global Voices report around sustainability. Anything else you might add here?
So I completely agree. I was smiling when you were talking, Karina, because everything you said makes complete sense, irrelevant of looking at the data, right? If we think even about how we as individuals operate. And one huge trend we're seeing, and it's been very much brand led, is re-commerce. So the resale of goods, pre-owned. I actually like to call it pre-loved, right? Because I personally love re-commerce, right? And I buy a lot of pre-loved items. Um, we heard a lot of this in the actual Global Voices report. And why are people buying it? Yes, primary reason for buying it is cost, but the second reason is sustainability. And if we look at Gen Z and millennials, we see a much higher interest level, like 50 between the 50 and 40% in terms of their view on sustainability and the importance of that in terms of how they view a brand. Is less so in the kind of the older generations. Um, I think as brands start to look to differentiate and to diversify, developing offerings to serve the re-commerce industry, because we do anticipate it is going to become an industry in itself, is hugely important. It is still early days, but I do expect over the next 5 to 10 years that we will see a surge of kind of re-commerce offerings, bringing availability to many people across the world for like higher value goods at a lower price offering, which will also then I think accelerate the view on sustainability, because I think it's up to brands to make it easier for consumers to actually start thinking about sustainability why they're actually doing something. I just don't think there's many options out there at the moment. But yeah, it's something that we think about a lot at ESW and that we're investing, a big part of our future strategy. We're thinking about re-commerce and the needs of brands over the next 10 years.
Yes, it's really fascinating to me and love that pre-loved note there, Tonia. And I know, Carina, you mentioned this already in your presentation too, just the drive for secondhand or refurbished products. And, maybe this is very interesting from a traditional retail brand perspective. Is there anything that they can know in terms of trying to catch this wave?
Well, I think as Tonia said, we're already seeing brands and retailers do this. I think it's a really interesting way that they can kind of do something sustainable, really demonstrate that they're doing something sustainable, um, and give consumers what they want. And I think that if they don't seize this chance and start getting on board, they're really going to be left behind because we've got a lot of brands already doing it themselves. And then we have the really rapid growth of platforms like Vinted, platforms like Depop. So I think, secondhand shopping is not a new trend. We've had it for years. We've had charity shops in the UK, thrift shops in the US, but it has had a really big surge in recent times. And as Tonia made a really good point there, particularly among the younger consumers, they love it from a sustainability point and they're really concerned about sustainability. But I think also what we're really seeing them is that they are buying kind of higher cost items, luxury items that they perhaps couldn't afford to buy new, but they can afford to buy secondhand. So it means that they can buy some of their clothing from a more affordable retailer on the high street, and then they can really jazz it up with a few luxury items that they bought secondhand. So I think it's definitely something that everyone needs to be thinking about now.
And one stat just to add to that is throughout the survey, we identified that 40% of shoppers have already bought something pre-owned or pre-loved.
Mm.
And of that 40%, 90% of them have said that they will do it again. So it is something that is starting to grow. And I expect, a big change year over year as we keep monitoring these numbers.
Great. This is such a captivating conversation around just how much the trends are changing and how retailers and brands can kind of take advantage of that change in expectation also and lean into this brand and aspirational and perspective that consumers are really looking for in sustainability and some of these other factors. Um, we definitely want to get to some questions. Karina, Tonia, thank you so much for sharing these perspectives. Um, why don't we shift now to get into some of the Q&A portion? We have received a number of questions from the audience, which is great. And why don't I start with you, Tonia? How can brands and retailers really balance this price versus consumer expectations, and specifically given that tariffs are going to make, you know, cost of inbound goods more expensive?
It's we've spoken about this a bit already, right? It's a tricky one, okay? And in terms of the retailers and the brands themselves, they need to really assess their strategies and explore ways to mitigate the uncertainty around tariffs, right? Without having to avoid pushing that tariff onto the end customer, because the impact of that will be a drop in conversion. There are ways to do it, and there's various strategies which we use at ESW, which is around, there's different types of supply chain solutions, such as, bonded warehousing, B2B2C, which wholesale models. There's all these different types of business models that brands can evaluate to see if it solves their problems. Um, that is the way that brands are going to have to address it. What we would strongly suggest and what we say is that, we still have to ensure that we give transparency and visibility to the end customer at the point of checkout as to what the cost is going to be. Nobody likes hidden costs. And so that is essential to meet the customer experience, the consumer experience, because they not only do we want one purchase, we want repeat purchases and we want to build loyalty. I don't think any consumer right now is unaware of the challenges within global trade, right? And so there is already there's a cautiousness about making international purchases. Brands need to be creative. They need to think outside the box. They need to reassess the strategies that they've had in place, which have probably been there for many years and just are not fit for purpose, and look at new business models to support them in meeting the consumer expectations, especially around price.
Right. And see the next question. You're almost setting a really good table setting for that next question, which is for the brands that are really just starting out to explore cross-border e-commerce. What can they do to ensure they give a customer experience that is positive from the outset?
So we mentioned it earlier on. It starts with understanding those expectations. Understand the expectations on a country by country basis, and ensure that if you're planning a strategy to drive your brand globally, that you're doing it in a way that you know that you can meet those expectations. So if we just take the example of Brazil versus Italy, 2 weeks tolerance for deliveries versus Italy has a 3-day expectation. So that's one point. The second point is like transparent and localized communication of all costs and delivery details. People like to know where their product is. I don't think any of us as consumers, I get into a state of panic if I order something online and I don't have a tracking link. Oh my God, the panic that ensues. And I love online shopping. I think additionally, we spoke about localizing checkout, right? So display prices, and Carina mentioned it, display prices in local currency, duties, taxes, and shipping fees upfront at the point of checkout. That is so essential. And then, just accurate communication on the timelines, etc. So it all comes down to knowing the expectations in that country and building not a one size fits all, but a customized, tailored experience on a country by country basis.
It's really interesting. I'll just interject there really quickly, actually, with an anecdote, because I think Tony made a really good point there about just being really upfront and making sure that what the customer sees when they check out is what they're going to pay. I think if you think back to Brexit in the UK and we had a sudden change overnight, and there were duties and customs that people were having to pay on parcels over certain values. And to begin with, none of the brands and retailers had systems in place to incorporate that into the price at checkout. So what was happening was people were ordering from abroad. There was no warning on the website that they were going to get charged. They were then receiving the parcel and suddenly faced with a massive bill, and people were outraged. And now what's happened is that retailers have had the time to adapt, brands and retailers have had the time to adapt. They are now incorporating that into the cost. So the prices that the consumers in the UK see on their website are prices that include all of those duties. And actually, then people are okay. People are sometimes willing to pay a little bit more, but they'd want to know from the outset that they're paying a bit more. The worst thing that can happen is when it's a surprise.
Yeah.
Yes, that makes complete sense. That would be very disorienting and least of all probably upsetting for most consumers. I see we just got a another question, and this one is regarding price as well. If consumers are pinching budgets with discretionary categories like apparel, etc., and leaning on Chinese goods for value, is there a different or similar trend in essentials or thinking of those as home care, personal care, health and beauty? Are shoppers shifting spend priority because of this as well in this area of essentials? For either of you, Carina or Tonia, feel free to.
I mean, I can talk to the UK here certainly, and we've had quite a fair bit of economic pressure, and we have seen here that I mean, I'm not talking cross-border here, but I'm talking in terms of where people are buying their essentials. We've definitely seen a shift to the discounters, and actually, that's one of the reasons that in the UK we've seen a kind of e-commerce shrink back a little bit from where it was, because in food for the essentials, people are going to the discounters. They're going to Aldi and Lidl. They're going to cheaper places to buy their food. I think that we will probably see similar things in other categories. I think beauty is a really interesting one though, because beauty actually is often a category that does quite well when consumers are feeling the pinch. There's that kind of lipstick effect. People like to buy something nice to make them feel good, and spending kind of £10 on a lipstick that feels like a bit of a luxury, but it's not mega bucks compared to other items that you're buying. So I think definitely we're seeing that trend in other countries. I think that, food naturally is something that's not bought cross-border so much, so we don't quite see that same Shein and Temu effect. I imagine, though, that they are having a bit of an impact in some of the other kind of consumer goods categories.
I would support everything that Karina said. I think interesting, we do see a massive surge in health and beauty, right? So, and I think it's a market that we need to watch very carefully, from the prospect of growth. I think there is the availability of products that make everyone feel good at a low cost, right? So that's something from an international cross-border is booming. I completely support what Karina said on food. That is more of a domestic type of a market scenario. I think on the utilities and kind of the essentials and utilities, when purses are tightened, everyone will look to see how they can drive efficiencies in their spending. And so, yes, I would anticipate whether it's Shein and Temu, I'm not so sure. It could be more domestic providers in the kind of in the more cost conscious categories. But yeah, I would definitely anticipate some shrinking there.
This trend is one to certainly keep an eye on, and certainly for brands and retailers, knowing that different categories will be impacted at different times. Kind of circling back to one item, there was a question regarding the checkout process and how can brands really, prioritize giving a trust built experience there in the checkout process and really reduce abandonment rates.
Yeah.
Is there any aspect of this that has been overlooked by our conversation so far?
I think we covered quite a lot of it when we spoke about understanding what the expected and the most used, payment options are on a per country basis. We spoke about the differences between credit card and buy now, pay later and digital wallets and then cash on delivery in the Middle East region. So I'd say that is the biggest focus there. Once you solve that and you have a checkout which builds trust on the provider, we have all been that consumer that goes on to buy something and doesn't because it doesn't feel right, because we're all so fearful of fraud, right? We're so fearful of it. So ensuring that your checkout instills trust, right, rather than raises the awareness of like, does this look and feel right? They all contribute to a high conversion and a high checkout conversion completion. So I would say, I don't know if Carina, you'd add any more, but they would be our biggest kind of focus points.
Yeah, and I would totally agree that those are the two biggest, absolutely. Another little thing that I think is a small thing, but actually can make quite a big difference is like autofill addresses, like remember who the person is. Autofill address forms, some forms allow you to do it, some don't. It's so saves you a couple of minutes, but you will get shoppers who are like, they might be trying to buy something really quickly. It's an impulse purchase, and then they have to manually fill out their whole address, and they just think, oh, you know what, I'm not going to bother. So I think really it's just trying to erase as much friction as possible in that checkout, and that's why we're seeing the kind of one-click purchase like Amazon offers. It's really popular because customers can just say, okay, you know who I am, you know where I live, nothing's changed, buy it, you know what my preferred payment method is. So I think as much as possible, trying to push towards that frictionless checkout experience.
I completely agree. I always think when I go and shop on Amazon that you don't actually realize you've made the purchase by the time you've made the
No,
purchase.
yeah,
It's so seamless, right? You're like,
yeah,
I've already checked out. Oh, okay. So you want to be sure.
yeah.
But yeah, that's the goal, right? That's the goal.
And I see we have time for just one last question. I see one here that is definitely geared towards what should retailers be thinking about for the next 12 to 18 months. For Tonia, Carina, what's one emerging trend that you would say brands should really be paying attention to over the next 12 to 18 months?
I would say, I spoke about it briefly. I'm going to say two things, right? So one is in terms of innovative future growth, re-commerce is on the agenda. They need to have a strategy to solve for e-commerce. Um, One essential thing with international e-commerce is localization. They need to localize to meet customer expectations and also reap the rewards of the investment they're making to actually go global. So they would be my two top things.
I'm also going to take two here because I don't think one's enough. I'm going to go with social commerce as my first one. And actually, just the kind of importance of social networks across the path to purchase. So we're really seeing they're playing a really important role from discovery through to research, consideration, purchase. Brands and retailers really need to think about their social strategies, and it's really important to kind of reach consumers where they are. And so part of that is going to be through social networks. And then the other one is AI. And the kind of rise of agentic shopping agents. It's still so new, it's really kind of hard to tell how this is going to play out. If we see a big rise in third-party shopping agents, ChatGPT as a shopping agent, we might see that there's then less traffic to retailer websites. We might see that there's less opportunities for discovery, for upselling. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to think about. But I would like to hope that actually consumers are still going to visit brand websites because they can be really engaging, they can be really compelling. And I think as long as they're making that experience of buying from that website as good as possible, people still love shopping, right? So hopefully that means that they will still be really popular with consumers.
This is a great list of answers and questions from the audience. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Carina, Tonia, thank you so much for sharing your analysis and insights. And certainly a big thank you to our eMarketer studio crew behind the scenes. We hope this webinar was useful and that the data, context, and the forward-looking takeaways will help your organization adapt in real time. Before we go, quickly, AI search is now available on eMarketer Pro Plus, which offers exclusive data and deep analyst insights. Please connect with us for more details. And announcing just to join us on September 9th for eMarketer's Future of Digital Summit. This is a live future-focused event designed to help you navigate the next 5 years of marketing and advertising. Do get tickets. The seats are limited. And catch more webinars like this one and sign up for our newsletters, all at emarketer.com. Also, our podcasts have a fresh new look with the same sharp insights. Watch or listen to Behind the Numbers, Reimagining Retail, and the Banking and Payments Show on Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. You will receive a link to today's playback soon, so please reach out with any questions. Thank you all again and enjoy your day.